You have seen the photograph. Everyone has. It is printed on the back of your eyelids, sepia-toned and grainy, smelling of developer fluid and dust. You know the composition by heart. There is a wooden barn. The planks are weathered gray by the Arizona sun. Standing in the foreground are 6 men, maybe 7. They are wearing dusters and bowler hats, or perhaps Union cavalry uniforms. Memory blurs the fashion. They are holding Winchester rifles. The stocks rest casually against their hips. They look proud. They look like men who have conquered the impossible. And behind them, nailed to the barn wall, is the thing. It is massive. The wingspan stretches the entire length of the building, perhaps 40 feet tip to tip. The wings are not feathered like a condor. They are leathery, bat-like, ribbed with cartilage. The head hangs slack. A long, tooth-filled beak points toward the dirt. It looks like a pteranodon plucked from the Cretaceous period and dropped into the Old West. You saw this photo in a library book when you were 10. You saw it in a Ripley's Believe It or Not annual. You saw it on a late-night History Channel documentary. You are certain of it. But here's the first twist of the knife. The photograph does not exist. It has never been printed in a newspaper. It is not in the archives of the Tombstone epitaph. It is not in the Library of Congress. Every cryptozoologist, historian, and folklorist who has spent the last 50 years hunting for this image has come up with nothing. Empty hands, confused memories. It's the most famous photo in cryptozoology, and it is a hallucination. This case is not just about a monster in the desert. It is about a glitch in the collective human memory. It is a forensic investigation into a story that refused to die. A narrative so powerful that it planted an image into the minds of millions of people. Welcome to Tombstone. Watch your step. The history here is unstable. The date was April 26th, 1890. Location: the Tombstone Epitaph Office, Fremont Street. To understand the monster, you must first understand the habitat. And in April of 1890, Tombstone, Arizona, was a predator starving to death. The town too tough to die was, in fact, dying. The glory days of 1881 were a decade gone. The days of Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, and the OK Corral. The Birdcage Theater was quieting down, but the real killer wasn't a gunfighter. It was the water table. The silver mines, the beating heart of the economy, had flooded. Giant Cornish pumps throbbed day and night. They tried to suck the groundwater out of the shafts, but the silver was drowning. The population was drifting away. The town was suffocating. In this atmosphere of economic anxiety, the Tombstone Epitaph wasn't just a newspaper. It was a lifeline. It needed to sell copies. It needed to prove that Tombstone was still a place where things happened. Enter the issue dated April 26, 1890. On page 3, buried among the local gossip and mining reports, appeared an article that would outlive the silver boom. It was written in the dense, flowery prose of the Victorian frontier, but the content was pure nightmare fuel. The headline was not subtle. Found on the desert. The article details an event involving 2 ranchers, unnamed, a classic red flag in journalism. They were riding largely in the wastes west of the Huachuca Mountains. They were not hunting for monsters. They were likely hunting for stray cattle or water. What they found, according to the ink on the page, was a biological impossibility. The report describes a winged monster resting on the desert floor, but the forensic details provided are surprisingly specific and surprisingly unbirdlike. The 2 ranchers are riding west. They are not in the movies. They are in the crushing heat of the Arizona territory. Their horses are nervous. The air is still. In this terrain, sound travels for miles. The snap of a dry branch is like a pistol shot. Then, they see the anomaly. The epitaph report is very specific about the creature's behavior. It was not circling in the sky, hunting for prey. It was grounded. It was lying in the scrub, likely panting. Its massive wings were splayed out in the dirt. This detail is biologically significant. If this were a hoax, why describe the monster as pathetic? Why rob it of its terror? The description aligns with a creature suffering from hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. If a relic pterosaur had somehow survived in a subterranean pocket or a high-altitude nest, descending to the desert floor in 1890 air would leave it gasping. The air is thinner in oxygen now than in the Cretaceous period. The ranchers approach, the horses panic, the creature reacts. It does not take flight. It can't. The report states it rose on its hind legs, an awkward bipedal stance. It attempted to run. It flapped its wings, not to soar, but to gain momentum, hopping like a grounded vulture. The red flag of the description is the beak. The ranchers described it as an alligator mouth. This matches the anatomy of the anhanguera, or similar ornithochirids, pterosaurs with elongated, toothed snouts that could easily be mistaken for crocodilian by a cowboy who had never seen a dinosaur textbook. The men dismount. They level their Winchesters. This is not a battle. It is an execution. They fire. The report implies multiple shots. The creature collapses. It was 90 feet long, according to them. The dust settles. They walk up to the carcass. They touch the skin. It isn't scaled like a lizard. It is smooth. It is reddish. This is a detail that paleontologists would only theorize about a century later. They pull the wings open. They describe a thick and nearly transparent membrane. This is impossible for a bird. It is precise for a bat or pterosaur anatomy. Then, the logic of the frontier takes over. They don't have a camera. They don't have a wagon large enough to haul a beast the size of a refined barn. They are miles from town. They pace out the length. They marvel at it. And then, realizing the futility of the physics, they cut off the tip of one wing. A trophy. And they ride away. They leave the biological find of the millennium rotting in the sun. Date: 1930s to 1960s. The body disappeared. Maybe the coyotes ate it. Maybe the flash floods of the monsoon season washed the remains down into the San Pedro River, grinding them into dust. Or maybe, as the skeptics say, there never was a body. Only a bottle of whiskey and a bored editor. But the story didn't rot. It mutated. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, the Works Progress Administration, WPA, sent writers into the West to interview the old-timers. They wanted to capture the Old West before it died out. They found the Thunderbird waiting for them in Bisbee, in Hereford, in the nursing homes of Tucson. People started talking. They didn't just repeat the epitaph story. They added to it. One miner claimed he heard the wings beating like canvas, tearing in a storm. A stagecoach driver claimed the great winged thing had shadowed his rig for miles, blocking out the sun. Rumors spread that the creature hadn't been left in the desert, but dragged to town and nailed to a barn. The phantom photograph. This is where the timeline fractures. Sometime in the mid-20th century, the public became convinced that a photograph existed, likely triggered by an article in Saga magazine in 1963 by writer Jack Pearl. Pearl retold the story of the 1890 killing, but he embellished. He described the photo. He described the men. He planted the seed. The human brain is a pattern-matching machine. When we read a vivid description, we create an image. If we recall that image enough times, the brain forgets it was created and files it under memory. Thousands of people wrote to magazines claiming they saw the photo. It was in my grandfather's attic, they said. It was in a National Geographic in 1955. Requests flooded the Tombstone epitaph. The editors were baffled. They had to create a form letter stating the truth. We never printed a photo. We didn't have the technology to print photos in 1890. And yet, the memory persists. It is a Mandela effect, driven by our desire for proof. We need the photo to be real. Because if the photo is real, the monster is real. And if the monster is real, the world is still wild. We must clear the evidence board of one final confusion. You will hear people say, the Indians knew about it. They called it the Thunderbird. This is a cultural contamination. The Thunderbird of the Navajo, Hopi, and Apache is a spiritual entity. It is a being of power, controlling the rain and lightning. It is not a fleshy, stinking reptile that gets shot by cowboys. By calling this creature the Tombstone Thunderbird, later storytellers colonized the myth. They took a sacred concept and plastered it onto a cryptozoological freak show to give it unearned legitimacy. The indigenous accounts of the region do speak of monsters, flying snakes, or dangerous spirits, but they rarely align with the biological description of the epitaph beast. The tombstone creature stands alone. It is an orphan of history. Present day, we are left with a corpse that vanished and a photograph that never was. So, what actually happened in the desert in April 1890? To find the truth, we must stop looking at the newspaper and start looking at the ground. Arizona is a graveyard of monsters. The Dragoon and Huachuca Mountains are not just piles of granite. They are ancient seabeds and shorelines from the Cretaceous period. Paleontologists know that pterosaurs once soared over this exact landscape. Their bones are embedded in the rock. Consider this theory. The ranchers did not find a living creature. They found a fossil. Erosion in the desert can be sudden and violent. A flash flood shears away a cliff face, exposing a slab of rock that has been hidden for 65 million years. On that slab, articulated in perfect reddish-brown stone, is the skeleton of a winged beast with a 20-foot wingspan. The ranchers write up. They lack the scientific vocabulary of paleontology. They see a monster. In the heat and the excitement, the stone becomes a carcass. The mineralization becomes smooth skin. They didn't kill it. Time killed it. But they claimed the kill because that is what men of the frontier did. They conquered the land. This theory explains the measurements. It explains the smooth skin. It explains why they couldn't move it. It was solid rock. And it explains why the body disappeared. It was eventually covered by shifting sands or simply lost in the vastness of the Bahada, waiting for a university team that never came. Or we must face the razor of Occam. The Tombstone epitaph was fighting for survival. The editor, John Clum, knew that sensationalism sold. Though he had left by 1890, his spirit remained. In the 19th century, the tall tale was a recognized genre of humor. Newspapers frequently printed stories of jackalopes, hodags, and giants. The April 26th article is tucked away, devoid of named witnesses, devoid of follow-up. It reads like a filler piece, a lie agreed upon to entertain the miners who were watching their livelihoods drown in the flooded shafts. So why does this case refuse to close? Why are you, the jury, still hoping that the photo is real? Because the Tombstone Thunderbird represents the death of the frontier. 1890 was the year the U.S. Census Bureau officially declared the frontier closed. The railroad had won. The bison were nearly gone. The Apache resistance had ended with Geronimo's surrender in 1886. The map was filled in. The magic was draining out of the world. The Thunderbird was a psychological rebellion against modernity. It was the West screaming that it was still wild. It was the idea that somewhere in the desolate canyons, something ancient and terrible had survived the Winchester rifles and the steam engines. We created the memory of the photograph because we needed to believe that we hadn't killed everything. We needed to believe that there was still a dragon left on the map. The physical evidence is zero. The photographic evidence is a collective hallucination. The textual evidence is a sensationalist rag from a dying silver town. But if you drive out past the Dragoons at sunset, when the shadows stretch long and the heat ripples the air. Look up. The sky is big enough to hide anything, and memory is the only fossil that is still alive. The file you have just reviewed was assembled from the fragmented strata of frontier journalism and folklore. The primary artifact, the patient zero of this contagion, is the Tombstone epitaph, April 26, 1890. Without this single column of text, the creature would not exist. Secondary infections were traced through the Arizona Daily Star and the Prescott Journal-Miner. These papers acted as carrier signals, amplifying the signal across the territory. For the elusive photograph, we must look to the mid-20th century pulp archives. The investigation points to Jack Pearl's article in a 1963 issue of Saga magazine as the likely genesis of the Thunderbird photo memory. It was here that the description became so vivid, it superseded reality. We also acknowledge the Works Progress Administration writers of the 1930s. These government scribes tasked with documenting a dying era captured the oral whispers of the stagecoach drivers and miners. However, the case cannot be fully sealed. The history of the West is a history of lost things. Lost minds, lost cities, lost people. It is statistically improbable that a photograph exists, but probability is not certainty. Somewhere in a dusty attic in Bisbee, or a forgotten shoebox in a basement in Tucson, or pressed between the pages of a family Bible in Tombstone, there might be a square of tin or paper. The chemicals might be fading. The silver nitrate might be tarnishing. But in the background of that image, nailed to a gray barn, there might be a shadow that defies explanation. We tell ourselves it's a myth because that is safer. But every time a hiker goes missing in the Superstition Mountains, or a Cessna vanishes over the Mojave, we remember the epitaph. We look up. We scan the blind spots in the radar, because the sky is very large, and we are very small. That was The Last Dragon of the West. Written and performed by the author, me, James Cawley. There's a specific kind of grief in a world that has been entirely mapped. We cling to that grainy, sepia-toned memory of a barn and a beast, because the alternative, a sky filled with nothing but physics and satellites, feels like a door locking behind us. We want the photograph to be real, not because we love monsters, but because we fear the silence of a world without secrets. Perhaps the Thunderbird didn't die in a wash in 1890. Perhaps it simply migrated from the desert floor into the only wild place we have left, the flickering, unreliable shadows of our own collective memory. My name is James Cawley, and you're listening to Dust and Echoes. If you like stories like this, stories that dwell in the static between truth and legend, and search for the ghosts hidden in the blind spots of history, then you're in the right place. I'm glad that you're here, sitting around this fire with me. I release a new story every single week, right here, every Tuesday. As always, thank you for listening. Until next time, remember this. You can burn the photograph and tear up the map, but the desert never forgets the shape of its own ghosts.